Ahead and get started. First of all, thank you so much to everybody who is here joining us for this closing keynote session. Big thank you to all of you who have been with us for the past 2 days, also throughout the rest of the symposium. We've had fantastic attendance and lots of interactive and engaging presentations and a whole lot of learning that has happened. So I just want to give a big thank you to all the attendees who have been with us. A couple of housekeeping things before we start. When the symposium finishes up today, there will be back on the main website a link to the evaluation. So you can go in there, do an evaluation of the program. And if you're interested in claiming CE for the Medical Library Association, you can get up to 10, or you can get 10 CE for participating in this. Once you do the evaluation, it'll walk you through that process to go ahead and get that claimed. That's kind of the housekeeping. Normally I would go on to like invite you to the next sessions, but we're wrapping up now. I almost don't know what to do. The session is being recorded and it will be available through the conference website shortly. I don't know what that means, but it'll be later today or tomorrow for 30 days. And then afterward, all the conference presentations will be moved to the NNLM's YouTube channel. So you can watch all of them as many times as your heart is content and relearn all of the awesome information that we have gotten over the past couple days. Okay, moving on. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you my colleague and my mentor, and maybe most importantly, my friend, John Eldredge. John is a professor and evidence-based practice librarian at the University of New Mexico. He lives in Albuquerque. His bio reads as follows. John occupies a unique niche as both an active researcher and as a practicing librarian. He has published over 65 peer-reviewed journal articles and 22 book chapters. Last year, John's colleagues selected him for the Health Science Center Faculty Research Excellence Award at the University of New Mexico. He also holds 11 other research awards. He conducts both quantitative and qualitative forms of research, although during the past decade, he has focused upon randomized control trials. He has led the effort to define the Medical Library Association's research agenda. His passion for integrating research results into practice led him in 1997 to found the US movement currently known as Evidence-Based Library and Information Practice. At the University of New Mexico, John integrates his research skills into his teaching. He is co-chair of the quantitative medicine block required for all second-year medical students. He also co-teaches the College of Population Health Department's determinants and equity in public health required of all of the MPH students. He is a domain leader and instructor for the biomedical informatics course required of all students in the Master's of Science and Clinical Research degree program, and is associate program director of the Clinical Informatics Fellowship. He is a full professor in the Health Science Library and Informatics Center, School of Medicine, Family and Community Medicine Department, and the College of Population Health. He holds degrees from Beloit College in Wisconsin and the University of New Mexico and the University of Michigan. So yeah, John's done a lot and really transcends the boundaries of being a librarian and a researcher all wrapped up into one person. And I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that he was just recently named a fellow of the Medical Library Association. So yay, congratulations for that. John, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to you. Questions y'all can put into the chat and we will address them at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you everyone for hanging in there for the final keynote of the Research Symposium. Heather did a great job of introducing myself. I'll tell you a little bit more about myself in a second, but researchers and librarians interact in multiple ways. And during this symposium, we've learned about some of the services and the resources that librarians are creating or have created to serve researchers. But as a researcher and as a librarian, I would submit to you that researchers live in a distinctly different world than librarians. And what I mean by that is librarians and researchers live by different priorities, different timelines, and different daily activities than librarians do. Maybe that's self-evident to some people at this keynote, but I want to stress that these are really different frames of mind. And what I'm going to try and do during this keynote is bridge those two worlds with the goal of creating greater research productivity. So Heather did introduce me, and that was a wonderful introduction, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank Heather for enlisting me for this job of putting together this keynote, which was something I'd been thinking about writing as the subject of a commentary, as a matter of fact, probably for Journal of the Medical Library Association. And her invitation and her enthusiasm and her encouragement led me to accept this invitation to come and speak to you today. I would also like to thank Tony Nguyen and all the people in the background, many who I have not met, and probably many you have not met either, who have been making this conference or the symposium a great success. I've been able to go to practically every program I wanted to in the last 2 days, and it's been a lot of fun, and I've learned a lot, which is great. And I congratulate my fellow speakers and presenters for doing such a great job, and really a lot of inspiring stories that I've heard the last 2 days. So thank you for that. And I'd also like to thank, here closer to home at the UNM Health Sciences Library and Informatics Center, our executive director and our de facto departmental chair, Melissa Rethlison, and our research unit director, Ingrid Hendricks, and as well as other colleagues here at UNM, for creating such a positive, research-oriented arena for us to work in as faculty members, and even some staff were involved in research as well. It just really makes life great when you have that kind of positive reinforcement happening to you all the time. I have a slideshow, and in case you can't see me on camera, this is what I look like when you dress me up and put me in front of a formal camera shoot. This is my family. Some of the activities that I like to engage in, not every day, but when I have a chance, when I'm near an ocean with waves, I like to surf and I like to ski, but on a more day-to-day or at least week-to-week basis, I like to bicycle. I bicycle to work every day. I do not even have a parking permit, and I ride my bike on errands because I'm very committed to living a sustainable lifestyle. My social life partially consists, and particularly consists during the pandemic, of walking and talking with friends and family. And then I really like hiking, and I'm actually going to talk a little bit about hiking in this keynote. Indoors, I like to scrapbook, and indoors and outdoors, I like to take photographs, maybe not professional quality, but I do like to document events, but I also like to take more artistic types of pictures. And I was never able to convince my wife or my kids ever to take up surfing, but they did enjoy, and I've enjoyed to this day doing with them when I'm at an ocean, boogie boarding, which is a small type of surfboard, which is may or may not have a fin, but is actually maybe a little less intimidating to surf in. And in calmer waters, I like to kayak. Heather already told you about all my research credentials. I was surprised when I saw that number, 11 research awards. I guess I did. I think it's all there somewhere in my 68-page CV. But I've had experiences outside of libraries. A lot of people don't know this about me, but I used to live on the Navajo Reservation in western New Mexico. And near where I used to live, I used to work also on the Navajo Reservation. I worked in the corporate world for a while before I became a librarian. And since I've become a librarian, I've actually been stepping outside of libraries. I spent almost 5 years outside of HISLIC, in terms of the funding, at least for HISLIC, although the building I stayed in there, was the Learning Design Center, where we were involved in instructional design and helping faculty members transition from in-person to online instruction. I also have been a biomedical informatics faculty member for 15 years. And to this day, I'm Associate Program Director for the Clinical Informatics Fellowship in our graduate medical education program. So on a day-to-day basis, I pretty much define or identify myself as a faculty member who's involved in research and in teaching and in service, the service specifically being, doing background stuff to make this library very responsive to the needs of people who use it, but specifically in providing reference and research consults to other researchers. And so that's how I identify on a day-to-day basis. In the context of this symposium, however, I would identify myself primarily as a researcher. And that leads me to my first poll question for you. Today, at the symposium, how would you define yourself as a researcher, librarian, or informaticist, as I mentioned? Maybe a patient, or maybe a student, or many other possibilities that you could check off other and then supplement in the chat so we could learn from you as to what those are. And I'll go ahead. Check. I guess I can't check myself off.
The responses are coming in. I'll just let it go for another second or so before I turn it over. I will, spoiler alert, very heavily librarian, librarian focused.
We suspected as much.
Right.
Now you have information about demographics of your attendees. Oh my goodness. Wow. So we have 10 researchers and I didn't even vote. So that's great. So we have 10, or is that 10%? Okay, we have about a denominator of about 100. So 10% researchers and librarians 94 and other folks as well. Thank you for playing along. That was interesting for me. And also maybe it'll give you a chance to know who else is in the audience, because in the last 2 days, I've really not been altogether sure who's in the audience unless they bring themselves to the attention of others through the chat. By the way, we weren't able to get the display mode of the slides up here, and I apologize. So you have to sort of see everything, but I don't know what's going on. It's just what happens. So my office here at the University of New Mexico overlooks a major walkway. This walkway connects a number of education, clinical, and laboratory areas, research areas of the campus. It also connects most of this campus with the shuttles and the parking areas on campus as well. And I'm sure at your campus, you have similar walkways. Anytime I go to another campus, I'm well aware of these major thoroughfares for pedestrians. What strikes me as interesting at my vantage point is that I come into work early sometimes because I serve on NIH panels, and they usually start at 9 o'clock Eastern. So that means I'm here at 7 in the morning, and typically, and more typically than coming in at 7, I'm working here later after 5, easily most days or evenings after 6 as well, working away, doing my job. And I have noticed over the years that my research colleagues, whether they work in laboratories or if they work primarily in clinical research, I notice them coming in similarly early, and the same ones, many of the same ones, are leaving quite late. And I also notice them working on weekends when I'm in here. And I also noticed that a number of my librarian colleagues are working late hours, or long hours. And so that leads me to a question that I want to pose to you, a thought question, give you a minute to really think about it, is why do you work such long hours? And I know this is not unique to UNM because I have colleagues and friends like Heather all over the country, and people are working long hours. And I'd like to know why you, as an audience member at this symposium, work such long hours. So the question is why? And to help you reflect, I'll give you a piece of scenery from New Mexico. That's actually an area near where Georgia O'Keeffe used to live. If you're familiar with her paintings. So hopefully that's enough time. I'd like to ask only the researchers. And so since there are only 10 researchers on this call, I'm going to ask them all to participate. Why do you work such long hours? And I'm going to just see what it is. I'm seeing to be available to try and I'm trying to balance life. But this question is for too many things to do. Okay. And funding. That's a researcher, I think. To do research and writing. Get work done. Deadlines. Yeah. Very good. I noticed that some librarians also answered just because I could see their names in the chat. Because people won't stop emailing me. I love that answer. So now I want to ask my librarian colleagues the same question. And since there's 94 of you at least, I think maybe that, put it in the chat, librarians, colleagues, why you do? I love to do what I do. Not enough staff. And people waiting on me. Coverage to help the team. Get everything done. Oh my goodness, somebody works across 4 time zones. Meetings. All right. I think that's probably at least a sample that we can go on. And so I'm going to try and do the researchers to see, let's see what they say. I'll just put them, they're doing research. So that's one. Can't read my own writing. Funding. Things to do. Deadlines. And we'll say other. So this is what the researcher poll said, according to my notes. And notice I had other, if I don't, love your work. Users here with the building was open expectation. I hope I'm summarizing this. I'm sure at least some people, lack of staff. And I guess lack of staff might be, put coverage up here. And then, oh yes, meetings. All right, so we have a poll, and the first is going to be for the researchers. I've put the answers that were given in the chat, and I guess all 10 researchers, and again, I cannot participate. So if the researchers could enter the poll, and if Heather, you can put the poll up for that first, it's just ABC. And this is for the researchers only. And if you have trouble, you can always move your poll over. A is research, B is funding, too many things to do, and D is deadlines, and E is other. All right, so it looks like, well, that was a large number. Research, and then too many things to do is 2 people. And it looks like deadlines is 4.
Sorry, I'm trying to move it where you can see it and be in
It's
the
all right.
seat on the way
Thank you,
too.
Heather. Thank you. So I guess it'll let me do this, I think. So we have 2. We'll even put the votes in. And I'll be happy to reshare these slides later. And sorry this is taking so long. And then deadlines is 4. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Okay, we have another poll coming right up for the librarians. And I will love to hear the answers on this. So A is love my work. B is users here, expectations. And I put coverage with that, even though that was a separate reason given. Lack of staff is C. D is meetings. So it's A, love my work. B, users here, expectations, coverage. C, lack of staff. And D is meetings. I just noticed a message on the polls that says host and panelists cannot vote. So I guess that's why I couldn't vote.
Okay, I'm going to stop. It looks like results pretty much have
Okay,
stopped.
thank you, Heather. So 11 said they love their work. 24 said it was the expectation. So the expectation was 11. And, oh wait, sorry. That's, oh, I have different numbers. Sorry. Okay. Sorry it's taking so long, but and then 7 for other. And if the folks in the other could indicate what those are in the chat, just so we can all know what those are, that would be wonderful. Okay, did anybody notice some commonalities between the two? And I'll put them up again. Here's the researchers. And here are the librarians. And we'll do the researchers again. This is not a representative sample, speaking quantitatively, but nevertheless might give us an idea. And these are the librarians. So anybody see any commonalities there? Maybe put it in the chat. Too many things to do, pretty similar. Oh, and I love this comment, not to mention all the things waiting for us at home. Yeah, we're overextended, aren't we? Expectations. Yeah, the expectations are a commonality. Interesting. I think there are other commonalities too. Oops, there's more answers. External pressures, management expectation, vocational awe. We're all tired. External motivations. That's interesting. There seems to be consensus revolving around external expectations, and also a desire on everyone's part for work-life balance. It's something I've worked at. I do work long hours in my office, but I should point out that when I'm not in my office, I rarely work. I try to just leave work at the office. Deadlines, external expectations. Wonderful comments. Thank you so much. And you see, we all get to know each other a little better this way. So I'm going to transition a little bit and talk about the research process. And thank you for this information because it does inform what I'm going to talk about next. I want to start on kind of a fun note. I like to hike. I mentioned that in terms of my activities. And during the midst of the pandemic in July 2020, I was in northern New Mexico and I was near Wheeler Peak, elevation 13,167 feet. It's the tallest mountain in the Rocky Mountain chain in New Mexico. It's not as high as the 14,000 foot mountains in Colorado, but they're still fairly big here in New Mexico. We have several 13,000 foot mountains. And we asked the question, do you think we can climb Wheeler Peak? And the question was couched in the context of having hiked other hikes, admittedly more in a desert environment rather than an Arctic environment or a forested environment. But still, we asked that question and our answer pretty quickly was, yes, we think we can. And so with that particular frame of mind, we decided about a plan on how we were going to do it, what equipment we were going to pack, what kind of footwear we were going to wear, what kind of clothing we were going to bring with us, how much water we're going to be bringing. New Mexico is a very arid state, and we have to think about things like water and food and maybe any kind of emergency supplies. And so we created a plan and we consulted maps, and not just maps that are on the trailhead, but also maps that we were able to access online or in print that we could find in hiking supply shops. I have a bunch of books on hiking in New Mexico, so I consulted those books. I went to some websites, National Forest Service website, All Trails, and more or less did my research to find out what to expect in that environment. So our first effort to climb Wheeler Peak was accessing it from Red River, New Mexico, from the northeast direction through Sawmill Park. On the maps, topographical maps, the trail looked like it was pretty gentle, which it was, and it turned out to be heavily forested. We got some great views of Wheeler Peak there, as seen in this picture, but it was raining heavily, and it was just raining and raining. And also we realized that if we were to take this trail, it was going to be, I think, 18 miles to the summit of Wheeler Peak, something that the maps and the guides didn't quite explain. So we went back and regrouped, and we decided we were going to try again to take Wheeler Peak. And so this time we tried to access it from the south, and we went to a very scenic lake called Williams Lake at the foot of Wheeler Peak. Or let's put it this way, you have to hike 4 miles to get to from the Taos Ski Valley to get to this lake. And when we turned and looked uphill and kept looking and looking and looking and looking up, we realized it was an extremely steep slope going straight up. On the map, it looked great. It looked like it was a very short trail. However, that short trail was pretty much vertical. Years before, when I was younger, my wife and I actually came down that part of Wheeler Peak, and it was a very rough trail, and we've lost the trail and ended up jumping from boulder to boulder. And I really didn't want to be jumping boulder to boulder uphill as well as downhill. So we abandoned that plan. And so then we tried again. On our third hike, we reached the summit of this peak in the mid foreground. It has the slashes on it, and that's because there was a mine up there, and it's called Bull of the Woods Mountain. We had a great time. We learned a lot about our hiking prowess and about the trails and the weather environments, and how much colder it is once you get above the tree line. We also met some interesting birds who ate out of our hands. They were Canadian jays, and we could just put breadcrumbs out, and they ate out of our hands, which was probably the coolest thing that I experienced during those failed hikes. So on to the next hike. We tried to take this mountain, Fraser Peak, but we only got to this far. We regrouped, looked at our maps, tried to think about this some more. And finally, in October, we took Fraser Peak and also almost climbed Mount Walter in the foreground here, the jagged peak, but we couldn't get to Wheeler Peak in the far distance because, of all things, we ran out of daylight. The days were shorter than they were in July, and we ran out of daylight. And so And also we had to go down into that steep ravine you see in the foreground, which made us lose 600 feet in altitude that we had to regain climbing up the other side of that ravine. So I like to think about that particular hiking adventure as analogous to the research process. And let's start, I'll go through the pictures again, looking at it through the frame of a research process. So we had an idea. We asked the question, can we climb Wheeler Peak? We answered, our hypothesis was, yes, we can. We consulted the literature, which was more than just the roadside or the trailside map, but we looked at all kinds of sources of information, which were reliable. We also talked to people who had climbed. And so we created a plan and we set off to do it, our research design. We set off to do it, we failed. We tried again, we got intimidated by the steep slope. We tried again, we got pretty far, and we were pretty proud of ourselves. And we did have some fun along the way, and we learned a lot, not only about the task at hand, meaning the research process, but we were able to get further and further along at each time. We made progress at each point. Now, thinking about the research process, I thought about other analogies, and these may occur to you as well. If you were to create a Mars rover and send it off into space on a 2-year mission to Mars, and to create all the executes that you would have to create and all the contingencies you'd have to anticipate, it might be a lot like doing a research project. When my adult children were younger, they were toddlers, there were times when I was doing research and I looked at raising my toddlers, because my wife ran an ICU unit and she'd leave for work at 6:15 or 6:30 in the morning and wouldn't come home till after 8, speaking of long hours. And I was with the kids all day by myself. And I thought, 2-year-old toddlers are a little bit like research projects. Quite an analogy there. And also in eastern New Mexico, in the high plains away from the mountains, 400 years ago, people would hunt bison, and they would go on hunts on those, and there were expeditions out onto the plains to hunt the bison. And they're a little bit like a research project too. So my next question, the polling question, is for the researchers only. Don't worry, librarians will have plenty of chances to be polled too. For the researchers, what is the best analogy for the research process? Is it the mountain climbing story I told about Wheeler Peak? Is it the Mars rover example? Is it the 2-year-old toddler? Is it hunting bison on the high plains? Or maybe you have your own analogy, and I'd love to hear it, because I think we'll all learn from that. And if you do check other, please indicate in the chat what that is. Wow, 67%.
Sorry, I forgot that I was on mute and I was talking, telling you I was that I was gonna stop it. Yeah, there we go.
So 67%, 10% Mars rover, 10% toddler, and 10% bison and other. Okay. I do not have firsthand experience in hunting bison on the high plains. One-sided romance. Oh, yeah. One-sided romance. I'm going to remember that one. Thank you, Andrew. Okay, thank you for playing along. And I would like to engage, if I could, for a little bit more seriousness. I mean, I am serious about the analogies, of course, and they are informative and instructive and helpful to get inside the minds of the researcher. But in all seriousness, I think of the research the world of a researcher in a certain way. Now, this is my first slide here. The research process is kind of how I learned research, and it's probably how if you learned anything in any research course, it's probably how you learned it too, is that you formulate a question, you search the literature, you develop hypotheses, because you want to have not only your null and your actual hypothesis, but the way I learned it was you always came up with alternative hypotheses. You select a study design, you establish how you're going to measure your results, you implement it, which may involve, of course, human subjects research, ethical board approval. You implement it and you interpret and report your results. That's sort of how I learned it. But anyone who's been a researcher knows that you may formulate a question, just like we formulated a question about climbing Wheeler Peak. And we had to revise that in our hypothesis as we learned more, and we consulted the literature and learned more, consulted the literature and did learn more, tried certain research designs, they failed, we learned more, and then we continued on with that whole research thread. So I thought, maybe a more realistic way to think about it other than a research process, or at least a supplementary concept, is to think about the researcher's key decisions. And, first decision is defining the research question, and then redefining it later in the process. And every time this happens, you feel a little bit like we did on that last hike, where we got so far and we could see Wheeler Peak, and then we had to climb all the way down. By the way, it's 10.5 miles from the Taos ski area to the top of Wheeler Peak, taking the route that I showed you. So it's 21 miles round trip. It's quite a long hike, and you do run out of time. But we went so far and we were so close, and we had to turn around so many times and go back to square one and get a new study design. And so a lot of times you have to redesign your study. How did we measure success? Well, we measured success. We did have a good time. We got to play with Canadian jays and feed them and have them actually stand on our hands. So not all was lost. So there was some measurement, accomplishments that we could look at. Great memories, great photographs. Friends of mine on Facebook definitely got to go through the whole adventure with us. But nevertheless, there's interpretation that comes later. And I mentioned Ingrid Hendricks. 20 years ago, we did a randomized controlled trial, and we had our hypotheses, and we had our null hypothesis, and we had alternative hypotheses, and we got results that didn't match anything that we anticipated. So sometimes you have to spend a lot of time interpreting your results, maybe go back to the literature, take a look. You have those unexpected results. Sometimes you thread different research projects together to accomplish a larger research goal of learning something. Sometimes you just have a research process and you're just trying to have a proof of concept. I suppose in retrospect, the Wheeler Peak adventure was a proof of concept adventure, but it really wasn't, because we thought seriously we were going to make it the first time. And then permeating the entire research process is the question of funding. And question of funding makes me immediately think of some stories that my parents told me. My father served in the United States Navy in the North Atlantic on a destroyer escort. He lived a life, and he had a uniform identical to the character that was played by Tom Hanks in the movie Greyhound. And he was fighting submarines and protecting convoys from the submarines in the North Atlantic. It was a terrible war. The casualties were incredibly high in that war. We hear about the land war in World War II, but 36,200 sailors were killed. 36,000 merchant marine sailors were killed. These were civilians who were on those convoy ships. 3,500 merchant vessels were sunk, 175 warships were sunk, and those are just for the Allies. My father never really talked about it. I was from ages 6 to 12. I was obsessed with World War II and wanted to ask him all about it. So he'd say, it was awful. And that's all he would say about it. My mother, in contrast, who was in the Civilian Protection Corps, told me all about how she learned how to do firefighting and first aid and looking off the coast and trying to look at the profile of the ships. And so she had lots of stories to tell me. But one story that the two of them told me together was about liberty and victory ships. And these were ships that were quickly produced here in the United States at various docks. And maybe one reason why my mother told this story is that she lived, and where I grew up in the same house, was about 2 miles from a naval shipyard where they were building a lot of ships during World War II. And these victory ships were interesting because they sometimes would leave the dock and sink, literally sink. And in the case of victory ships, and most of them actually did succeed, but they were built in very short order, and they could be sent off to sea, and that some of them actually survived until the 1960s. But they were kind of prefab ships made very quickly and to spec. My father told me one story he did tell me about World War II in the North Atlantic is that a victory ship that was part of a convoy cracked in half during the crossing of the Atlantic. I guess the swells were too big and it cracked the hull, which must have been horrible. By the way, if you want to see a counterbalance, the German side of the Battle of the Atlantic, you can see the German movie Das Boot. But anyhow, the victory ships remind me of something that researchers go through, because I don't know a single researcher who doesn't have to apply for grants and try and secure grants. And so a major activity for researchers, speaking of going up a mountain and coming back down, it reminds me a little bit of the victory ships. These victory ships were made, people put a lot of effort into them, a lot of people put a lot of effort into a single ship, and it would only go out, maybe sink or crack in half, but more likely to be torpedoed by a German U-boat. And so it must have been very discouraging. And researchers are very discouraged at times by all the work they do to write a nice grant proposal and then to only see it come down in flames. There've been research grants that I've applied for that there was only 1 out of 100 applications for that research grant that was approved and funded. And so that is very much a part of the reality of a researcher. So the research process, here's sort of the generic, but also kind of the learned one, but it doesn't take into account the time frame. It may take years to get from the first step to the last step. And it's iterative, that you have to go back, just like we did. We had to go back, it was nightfall, go back and try again another day to go through the iterative process of the research process. And then here are the key decisions. So I do have a poll. I promise librarians they'll have another poll. I'll ask the researchers, how accurate would you say is my description of the research process? And if you give me a C or a D, please put in the chat. Maybe not, even if you give me an A, even if you want to add something, please put it in the chat so we can learn from your experiences as to the research process and what's involved.
I'm going to cut the time down on the polls a little bit, just in the interest of time.
Sure. Yeah, and we're doing well on time. We're going to finish up on time.
Okay.
But thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to stop this one.
So it's meh. Okay, good. I can live with that. So 32% said excellent and 63%. Even if you gave me an excellent grade, please let me know if there's anything else that you want to add to that description, just for the benefit of everybody. The extended duration of some steps or the circular iterative nature of the process. Oh, thank you. Finding collaborators. Yeah. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Building relationships. Yeah, and what's meant by building relationships, I think, is that when you are a researcher, you're absorbed in this whole world of of carrying out this, you're obsessed with, you know, your research, design, and so forth. You work with a lot of different people, and a librarian is one of those people that you work with. But you work with statisticians, you work with administrators, you work with budget people, you work with people at the funding agency or foundation. You're working with a lot of people, a lot of collaboration, building a team, and you have to build a team. Heather and I were part of a team that was very successful. Carried out a big project a few years ago. And actually, it's probably why we're friends, is because it was so much, oh, and the IRB and the animal. Yep. I'm seeing it. And these are great comments. Thank you very much for those comments. And so I want to move on and maybe. I love these chat comments. And Heather, since you're kind of in control, will these chat comments be savable so we can save them for later?
Yes, they will be. Sorry.
Yeah, and the reason why is what I would like to do is supplement these slides with responses, so, and some information, so people who look at this later or want to look at it later off the website can benefit from that. So far, I've given a lot of attention to researchers, and it's probably because it's a research symposium, even though it's attended mostly by librarians. And I was pretty much expecting that we were going to have mostly librarians in this session based on what Tony and Heather told me a few weeks ago. Excuse me. Nevertheless, I started off, I never thought I was going to be a librarian, and not for any negative reasons. It's just that I used to like live in awe of librarians. I was just so amazed that I could read a book out of my school library or my public library, and I'd go ask the librarian, I said, I like this book. Can you suggest another? And they would know. And so I was an avid nonfiction reader when I was a kid. And I worked in high school, volunteered at the checkout counter at the school library and hung out with the librarians. And then I had a work study job in college for many years there, you know, checking out books, interlibrary loan, helping out with reference. It was a lot of fun. But I never thought I'd be a librarian. I actually was thinking more along the lines of being a researcher. But nevertheless, you know, I always held librarians in the highest regard. But then people start saying to me, you know, have you ever thought of being a librarian? You seem to like information. And I was very attracted to what we might call information science, or maybe being an informatist. I was very attracted to that in terms of my computers class. So I went to the University of Michigan School of Information, which had an emphasis in the technology. And I learned so much about librarians, and I loved my classmates and had so much fun with them. And it's been the years that I've been in a library directly and not in a learning design center or, you know, off doing biomedical informatics research and, you know, faculty work. I've just really enjoyed the many friendships I've had with librarians and people I've worked with. Librarians come from such different backgrounds and have such different unique perspectives, and they have so many skills to offer that you never know. And even if you work with somebody in a library, oftentimes you don't know all of their interests and all of their skills that they bring until something happens. You're on a strategic planning committee with them or so forth, and then you find out. But librarians live in a really different world. And I want to emphasize, somebody said in the chat that I did not emphasize enough the amount of iteration and circularity and how long it takes. When I'm working in my role as a librarian and I'm helping researchers, I would characterize my job as being very episodic, very focused, very finite, and very time limited. I think if you think of those ship convoys crossing the Atlantic Ocean, you know, in a long string, is librarians, they think of, you know, each time a person comes to see them, they think of that as a unique package of assistance that they're going to give. And even though that package may take, you know, a day or a week, maybe even a month to take care of, it is pretty time limited, and that there is a beginning, middle, and end to that interaction. And then the researcher is happy, hopefully, and goes on with his or her research project. And the librarian turns around and there's already, as was pointed out in Why We're So Busy, there's already another researcher or a line of researchers waiting for the librarian's assistance. And so we deal with finite time projects when we're working with researchers. Now we have other projects that take longer, but in terms of our interactions with researchers, and it's a very finite set of interactions, and the researcher usually has an understanding of what they hope to get from this. I am going to ask the librarians, and only the librarians, if that's a fairly accurate statement about how librarians interact with researchers. And I will say, I will put the caveat on here before you answer, is a systematic review may be different. And I noticed Angela Spencer was on this call, and she's my collaborator. We did a scoping review on the many roles that librarians play in systematic review. So there would be an exception, but generally speaking, does that fit your description, fit your understanding? And if you finish with the poll, if you want to, yeah, I'm seeing that some librarians are already doing that.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this.
Thank you.
John, we've got about like 10 minutes left total.
Yeah, I know.
Okay,
Yep. I'm bringing it home.
and there's your results.
Okay, 23%, 56%, 19, poor. Okay, sorry. And even if it was excellent, you know, I noticed, I see that people have answered. Great, thank you. Okay, so good. I want to ask the librarians now in the chat, could you indicate what you think, and I'm in a professional context, librarians, I know you have other superpowers, but because I know many of you personally, but what are your superpowers professionally that most people don't know you have? What are your secret superpowers? Just please put the answers in the chat. Yeah, good points. Data management experience, doing a lot of things other than working with researchers directly, providing the resources or the services in the background, networking. Wow. I know a gazillion people. Yeah, I feel I connect people with information, but I connect them with each other too. Very good. Oh, I love these. Project manage, so forth. Oh. Problem solving, research manager. I love it. Thank you, librarians. I love your secret powers. So we are at the end. And so what are the takeaways for the researchers? I think researchers need to recognize when working with librarians that researchers' time frames are different than librarians. And I would encourage researchers to never hesitate to go back, because as your hypotheses change or your research design changes through all these iterations, don't hesitate to go back and qualify that. Or if you're having trouble interpreting results, go back. And I would suggest to you that if you have a librarian that you enjoy working with, that you bring them on board and integrate them completely from start to finish on a maybe multi-year research project, because I think you would be astonished at the secret powers that your librarian colleague or colleagues will have that might help you out with your research. Many people said they had deadlines, they had too much work when they were talking about researchers and had too much work. And one thing that we do here at the University of New Mexico, and I know it's done at other institutions, is we actually build librarians into contracts and into grant projects. So consider doing that, maybe a bit on a lark, but try and build them in. Also, just get to know librarians and their superpowers. I think you'll be amazed. And then for the librarians, I would just encourage you to pursue a research project, but not just any research project. I mean, I think librarians love to do surveys, but I would encourage them to go to a more hypothesis-driven, not this survey can't be, but go to a more hypothesis-driven type of research project. If you don't have a research project of your own, maybe join another research project just to get an idea of the world of the researcher. Learn and practice evidence-based library information practice. So many people have told me over the years that by learning using library examples of randomized controlled trials, or library examples of cohort studies, or library examples of qualitative studies, they're able to understand the research process so much better by looking at the study designs. Most importantly, as I ask the researchers to keep their door open to other possibilities, keep your door open to other possibilities. Make sure, I always end up my conversations with researcher colleagues who oftentimes come to me and say, I want to talk to another researcher. I always say to them, I'm sure that this is going to change. Your research project is going to change direction. So please come back at any time and I'll help you, even if it's kind of a variation of the same research questions. And recognize that researchers in their world are constantly in an iterative, very long haul process. So we have time for questions, and I also, will be happy to take any information from the chat that you want to share. Oh yeah, Bradley Young Flong mentioned, see about getting on IRBs and IACUCs. Yeah, and the second is animal research studies. Okay, I don't see any questions. Do you, Heather?
Nope, I was just being a cheerleader for EBLIP because
okay,
that's my baby. There's been a fair bit of, discussion of people chiming in on answering your questions. So it'll be interesting to go see. There's a plug for the MLA Research Training Institute also. Thank you, Andrea, for mentioning that. Yeah, just from my own perspective, since I have a microphone and I can do this, I definitely also strongly encourage, if you're able to work with an IRB or your IACUC. In my previous position, I sat on an IRB, 2 IRBs for 10 years. And the amount of information that I learned, because we did social behavioral studies, but we also did, NIH cancer funded studies also. So it was looking at all types of different research, all types of different consent forms, the study designs. I mean, so much information that I had to learn because I was responsible for voting on approving these studies or not, right? So definitely, if you're able to get into that type of work. Or earlier, somebody mentioned something about being on a pre-review panel for things before they go to the IRB. I can't remember if that was in this session or another one, but anyhow, that's something else that I think would be very beneficial for those of us who help support researchers, but maybe don't quite have a full grasp of what it is that they're doing with the information that we're providing to them, whether it just be search results or whatever the case might be. Sorry to hijack your talk.
No, don't hijack. So it would be unfair of me to not tell you that I eventually got to the top of Wheeler Peak. As you can see, it was in 2021, 13 or 14 months after the first effort. Climbed it in a thunderstorm with a hailstorm, and pretty much on the spur of the moment, we went to Williams Lake, looked up the hill and said, that's the only way we're going to do it. And we climbed it and we succeeded in our project, just as I hope you succeed in all your research projects, iteratively, I'm guessing. Thank you so much for the chance to spend time with you. And thank you so much for participating, because I was able to learn alongside you. And so thank you for that. do I just turn it over now to you, Heather, or
Yep,
how does that work?
yep, back to me. You can stop sharing, and I will thank you, John, very much for your sharing your expertise and experience and so forth with us. I really appreciate it and learned a bit, and it's nice to learn about everybody else that was participating also. So thank you all for that. I again just want to thank everybody for their participation in the past 2 days of our whole symposium, because it has been nothing short of fantastic. I am so happy with how things have turned out. We put a lot of work into this. So I'm very pleased now to be able to turn it over to our closing remarks from Martha Meacham, who is our fearless leader in the NNLM, and will close things out for us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Heather. We are now at the end of our 2-day experience. It has been amazing, and I thank you all very much for attending and participating. I certainly have appreciated all the information and learning that has taken place. I did a little recap yesterday, and so I wanted to share a few of the things that I noted from today as well. We enjoyed the pre-symposium with Sally Gore, and there are so many intersections between research and libraries. And with Sally's examples and guidance, I think many of us are now crafting new ways that we can all work together. I'm taking seriously the question that ePatient Dave asked: what will you do? What can you do? He offered a lot to think about and a great starting point for all of us to go forth and work together to learn more, especially as we confront our own health, but also as we work with others thinking about their health. Again, today I had to hop around the concurrent sessions. They were all wonderful. I was excited to hear more about the SciStarter partnership with NLM. I'm very familiar with the work that the network of the National Library of Medicine has done with SciStarter, but I was pleased to hear of some of the other work and more about how librarians can be partners. The work from Northwestern was a prime example of creating teams and collaborations to accomplish great work. Their partnership with public libraries was interesting and innovative. On a NNLM personal note, I want to give a shout out to our own NNLM team at Northwestern in our evaluation center, who also exemplify collaboration. It's amazing to see the accomplishments that are possible when we come together. I was fascinated by the stories and partnerships in Baltimore, and I think we can learn from them and use it as a model. It was also just heartwarming to hear about their work and successes. The message of the session, ensuring research benefits communities, really resonated. It's so important that we are inclusive and really get to know those we're working with. It was great to hear the stories from presenters, and I learned more about really creating meaningful and community-driven engagements. Finally, we just saw our final presentation, a clear demonstration of the commonalities and differences, and I think more commonalities between researchers and librarians. And I love the analogy, and I'm now actually thinking of my own analogies for my library journey. So hopefully I can get some pictures to illustrate that to come. With that, I have a few reminders. Please fill out the evaluation form that will be available in the lobby area of the symposium. We really appreciate your feedback. Additionally, this is how you will be able to claim the Medical Library Association CE credit. Recordings and slides of the symposium will be available on this platform and then will be made available on YouTube. Finally, I want to offer a huge thank you to the planning committee of this symposium. It is a huge amount of work and you all pulled it off fabulously. I want to thank Tony Gwen, Heather Holmes, Jessica Killam, Peace Awesome Williamson, Emily Traw, Michael Balkenhall, and Rebecca Brown, and all of the other NNLM staff who helped support this event. It truly is a team effort. The NNLM is made up of wonderful and passionate people, and I hope the work and success of this symposium is evidence of that. And to learn more about the NNLM and the network as a whole, please go to nnlm.gov. And with that, I thank you for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Thank you again. Good night.